A bus driver forced a black woman off before her stop, but her reaction left all the passengers stunned. Sarah's day had started like any other, chaotic and draining at Memorial Hospital. The emergency room had been a revolving door of human suffering, but that's what she'd signed up for 15 years ago when she became a nurse. Tonight had been particularly rough. 3 car crash victims, an elderly man with a heart attack, and a scared teenage girl who'd reminded her so much of her own daughter. "Johnson, you are a lifesaver," Dr. Martinez called out as Sarah finished her last round of paperwork. "That heart attack patient in 204? His vitals are stable now." Sarah managed a tired smile, her hand cramping from the endless charts she'd been updating. "Just doing my job, Doc. Mr. Henderson reminded me of my daddy. Same stubborn look in his eyes when I told him he needed to stay in bed." The fluorescent lights of the hospital buzzed overhead as she gathered her things from the staff locker room. Her feet were screaming after 12 hours of constant movement, and she could feel every one of her 45 years in her bones. The clock on the wall read 11:05 p.m. "Girl, you need to get yourself a car, Regina," her colleague said as she watched Sarah pull on her worn blue jacket. "These late-night bus rides ain't safe." Sarah chuckled, shouldering her bag. "And miss my nightly entertainment? Besides, car payments and insurance aren't in my budget right now, not with Jasmine's college tuition." "How is that brilliant daughter of yours doing in med school?" Sarah's face lit up with pride, momentarily forgetting her exhaustion. "Top of her class, despite what some of those professors expected. You should have seen the look on Dr. Thompson's face when she aced his anatomy final. Just like her mama, proving them wrong every single day." The 2 women shared a knowing look, the kind that spoke of shared experiences and unspoken struggles. As Sarah headed for the exit, Regina called after her, "Text me when you get home safe." The night air hit Sarah's face as she stepped outside, carrying the first hints of autumn. The bus stop was 3 blocks away, and every step felt like walking on broken glass. Her compression socks had given up hours ago, and she made a mental note to buy new ones with her next paycheck. The streets were quiet, with only the occasional car passing by. Sarah kept her hand close to the pepper spray in her pocket, a habit born from years of late-night commutes. The newspaper stand near the bus stop still had today's headlines visible. City Transit Authority promises improvements, and below it, local community leaders demand action on discrimination claims. Sarah barely registered the headlines as she checked her phone. 11:23 p.m. Right on time, she could see the number 47 bus approaching, its headlights cutting through the light fog that had started to settle. The bus's brakes squealed as it pulled up to the curb. Sarah fished out her fare, coins jingling in her tired hands. As the doors opened, she put on her usual friendly smile, the same one she used with difficult patients. "Evening," she said to the driver, dropping her coins into the box. The driver, a heavy-set man with thinning gray hair and deep-set eyes, barely acknowledged her. Sarah noticed his nameplate read Frank Miller as she made her way down the aisle. The bus was nearly empty, just a couple of college students huddled over a laptop in the middle section and an elderly man dozing near the front. Sarah settled into her usual spot, 7 rows from the back. Close enough to the exit, far enough from any potential trouble, another habit learned from experience. She pulled out her phone to text her son Marcus. "On the bus, baby. Tea here is leftover lasagna in the fridge if you are hungry." The response came quickly. "Thanks, Mom. Be safe. Love you." Sarah smiled at her phone, then noticed something odd in the rear-view mirror. The driver was watching her. Not the casual glance drivers give to monitor their passengers, but a hard, focused stare that made her skin prickle. She tried to shake off the feeling, pulling out the novel she'd been trying to finish for weeks. The bus rumbled through the familiar streets of the city, the gentle motion almost lulling her to sleep despite her unease. One of the college students, a young woman with pink hair and multiple piercings, caught Sarah's eye and smiled. Sarah smiled back, remembering how Jasmine had gone through a similar phase in high school. "Did you see that paper that's due tomorrow?" the pink-haired girl whispered to her friend. "Professor Jackson is trying to kill us." "Tell me about it," her friend replied. "I haven't even started." Their conversation faded into background noise as Sarah noticed the driver watching her again in the mirror. His jaw was clenched, and his knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Sarah had seen that look before, in grocery stores when she reached for something at the same time as another customer, in elevators when she entered wearing her scrubs, in restaurants when she sat down at a table near the window. She knew what it meant, and her heart began to race. Still, she told herself she was being paranoid. Maybe he was just having a bad night. Maybe he was tired too. Maybe. The bus suddenly swerved, pulling over to the curb with a jerk that sent Sarah's book tumbling to the floor. They were nowhere near a bus stop, just a poorly lit stretch of road she knew was still 6 stops from her destination. The driver turned in his seat, his face twisted with an emotion Sarah had seen too many times before. "End of the line for you," he barked, his voice cutting through the quiet bus like a knife. The college students looked up from their laptop, confusion written across their faces. The elderly man in the front stirred from his doze, blinking in surprise. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she picked up her fallen book. "I am sorry," she said, keeping her voice steady, professional, the same tone she used to calm agitated patients. "But my stop is on Cedar Avenue. It's another 6 stops away." The driver's face reddened. "I said, end of the line," he repeated, each word dripping with barely contained hostility. "I don't want any trouble from your kind tonight." The words hung in the air like poison gas, their meaning unmistakable. Sarah felt a familiar mixture of emotions wash over her: fear, anger, exhaustion, and beneath it all, a deep, aching sadness that such moments could still happen in 2025. She thought of her children at home, of what she'd taught them about handling moments like these. She thought of her grandmother, who'd faced much worse and still held her head high. She thought of her patients, who trusted her with their lives regardless of her skin color. But mostly, she thought about how tired she was, tired of having to be strong, tired of having to prove her humanity, tired of having to turn the other cheek. The pink-haired student started to stand up, outrage clear on her young face, but Sarah caught her eye and gave a small shake of her head. No, this moment wouldn't be solved by well-meaning intervention. This moment required something else entirely. Slowly, deliberately, Sarah reached into her bag. Her heart was pounding, but her mind was clear. In this moment, she wasn't just Sarah Johnson, tired nurse wanting to get home. She was every person who'd ever been told they didn't belong, every person who'd ever been judged by the color of their skin rather than the content of their character. And she knew exactly what she had to do next. The tension on the bus was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah's fingers brushed against her phone, but she didn't take it out just yet. Instead, she looked around the bus, taking in every detail of this moment she knew would change everything. "Sir," she said, her voice carrying the weight of years of similar confrontations, "I'd like you to explain why exactly you are asking me to leave this bus." The driver unbuckled his seatbelt, turning fully to face her. "Don't play dumb with me. I've been watching you in my mirror, acting all high and mighty with your book and your fancy uniform. Think you are better than everyone else, don't you?" The elderly man in the front shifted uncomfortably. "Now, see here," he started to say, but the driver cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Stay out of this, old man. This is between me and her." Sarah felt a surge of emotions, memories of similar incidents flooding back. The time a patient had refused to let her draw blood, demanding a real nurse. The day her son Marcus came home crying because a teacher had accused him of cheating, saying his test scores were suspiciously high. The countless times she'd been followed around stores by suspicious security guards. The pink-haired student whispered to her friend, "Should we call someone?" The words carried in the quiet bus, and the driver's head snapped toward them. "You two shut it, or you'll be walking home too." Sarah straightened in her seat, squaring her shoulders. "I am a registered nurse at Memorial Hospital. I've just finished a 12-hour shift saving lives. I paid my fare, just like everyone else on this bus. I don't care if you are the Surgeon General, the driver shouted, his face growing redder. When I say get off, you get off. A car passed by outside, its headlights briefly illuminating the interior of the bus. Sarah could see the fear and discomfort on the other passengers' faces. The elderly man was gripping his cane tightly. The two students had moved closer together, and even through the rearview mirror, she could see the driver's hands shaking with barely contained rage. My name, Sarah said slowly, deliberately, is Sarah Johnson. I've been riding this route for 5 years. Never had a problem before. So why don't you tell these nice people the real reason you want me off this bus? The driver stood up, his bulk filling the front of the bus. That's it. I am calling the police. Please do, Sarah replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I am sure they'd be very interested in why you are discriminating against a passenger who's done nothing wrong. The word discriminating hung in the air like a thunderclap. The pink-haired student gasped softly, and her friend pulled out a phone, fingers hovering over the keypad. Discrimination? The driver spat. Everything's always about that with you people, isn't it? Can't just follow simple instructions, always gotta make it about race. Sarah felt a strange calm settle over her. She'd been here before, would likely be here again, but something about tonight was different. Maybe it was the exhaustion from her shift, or maybe it was thinking about her daughter Jasmine, fighting her own battles in medical school. Whatever it was, she knew this was a moment that mattered. Sir, she said, her voice carrying the same tone she used with frightened patients, I'd like you to think very carefully about what you are doing, about the choice you are making right now. The driver's hand moved to his phone, but he hesitated. Something in Sarah's calm demeanor seemed to unsettle him more than if she'd shouted back. You are disrupting my bus route, he said, but his voice had lost some of its earlier certainty. No, sir. You disrupted your own route when you decided to pull over and try to remove a paying passenger for no valid reason. Sarah reached for her bag, movement slow and deliberate. Now, we have two choices here. Either you continue driving and take me to my regular stop on Cedar Avenue, or... She finally pulled out her phone, the screen lighting up her face in the dimness of the bus. The driver's eyes widened as he realized what was about to happen. Or, Sarah continued, her finger hovering over the record button, we can let the world see exactly what's happening on bus number 47 tonight. The elderly man in the front spoke up again, his voice stronger now. Young man, I believe you should consider the lady's words carefully. The two students had both pulled out their phones now, ready to record whatever happened next. The driver looked around, suddenly seeming to realize he'd lost control of the situation. But instead of backing down, his face hardened. That's it. That's it, he shouted, reaching for his radio. Dispatch, I need police at. And that's when Sarah pressed record, her voice clear and steady as she began to document everything. The moment had arrived, and there would be no turning back now. Sarah's hands were steady now as she held up her phone, years of precise movements as a nurse coming into play. The bus's interior lights cast a harsh glow over everyone's faces as she began to speak into the camera. My name is Sarah Johnson. I am a registered nurse at Memorial Hospital, and I am currently being forced off bus number 47 before my stop. I'd like the driver to explain why. The driver's face contorted with a mix of rage and something else, perhaps fear. Turn that thing off! You can't record me! Actually, sir, the elderly man in the front spoke up, his voice trembling but clear. This is a public space. She has every right to record. Sarah continued speaking into her phone, her voice carrying the weight of countless similar moments throughout her life. I've just finished a 12-hour shift caring for patients. I paid my fare, I am sitting quietly, and I am 6 stops away from my destination. The pink-haired student had tears in her eyes now. This is so wrong, she whispered to her friend, who was also recording. So wrong. You want to know what's wrong? The driver shouted, his finger pointing accusingly at Sarah. People like her, always making everything into a big scene. I bet you are loving this, aren't you? Getting your viral moment? Sarah thought of her grandmother, Madeline, who'd told her stories of sitting at segregated lunch counters in the 1960s. She thought of her own mother, who'd been the first black teacher at her local elementary school, facing daily harassment but never backing down. "Sir," Sarah replied, her voice steady but tired, "I don't want a viral moment. I want to go home to my children. I want to take off these shoes that have been on my feet for 12 hours. I want to live in a world where I don't have to prove my right to exist in public spaces." The driver's radio crackled. "Unit 47, what's your situation? Do you need assistance?" He grabbed the radio, his knuckles white. "I've got a disruptive passenger. Need police at." "I am not being disruptive," Sarah interrupted, making sure her phone captured every word. "I am sitting quietly, recording this incident for my own protection. Would you like to tell dispatch why you really stopped this bus?" The elderly man shifted in his seat, grimacing as he stood up. Sarah noticed his Korean War veteran cap as he turned to face the driver. "Son, I am Harold Matthews. Rode these buses for 40 years, supervised drivers for 20 more after that. What you are doing here, it's not just wrong, it's illegal." "Stay out of this," the driver snapped, but his voice wavered slightly. Harold wasn't finished. "I've seen this before, too many times. Thought we were past it. Guess I was wrong." He pulled out his own phone with shaking hands. "I am calling Angela Chen at the Transit Authority right now. She's still superintendent of operations, isn't she?" The driver's face paled slightly at the name. Sarah kept her phone steady, recording everything, but her mind wandered to her daughter Jasmine. How many times would she face moments like this in her medical career? The thought brought tears to her eyes, but she blinked them away. The pink-haired student suddenly stood up. "My name is Lucy Martinez," she announced, her voice shaking but determined. "I am a witness to this discrimination, and I am streaming this live on Instagram right now." Her friend joined her. "I am Kate Williams, and I am recording too. This is not okay." The driver looked around the bus, realizing he was now being recorded from multiple angles. Sweat beaded on his forehead under the harsh fluorescent light. "You are all making a big mistake," he said, but his voice had lost its earlier authority. This isn't about." She was being. "I was being what, sir?" Sarah asked quietly. "Please, tell everyone watching exactly what I was doing to disturb you." Outside, a police siren wailed in the distance. Sarah's heart rate picked up, but she kept her composure. She'd been raised to be especially careful around law enforcement, but she knew she was in the right. Harold was speaking into his phone now. "Angela, it's Harold Matthews." "Yes, the same Harold. Listen, we've got a situation on bus 40. Driver's trying to remove a passenger." "Yes, that appears to be the motivation." "No, she's done nothing wrong. She's a nurse, for heaven's sake." The pink-haired student, Lucy, had moved closer to Sarah, as if trying to protect her. "My mom's a civil rights attorney," she said quietly. "Want me to call her?" Sarah shook her head slightly, keeping her phone focused on the driver. "Thank you, honey, but stay seated. I've got this." The driver's radio crackled again. "Unit 47, be advised. Transit Authority has been notified of a potential civil rights violation. Supervisor en route to your location." The color drained from his face. "No, dispatch, you don't understand. She's the one causing." "Causing what?" Sarah interjected, her voice carrying years of suppressed pain. "Please, explain to everyone watching what exactly I am causing by sitting quietly on this bus, trying to get home to my children after serving my community for 12 hours. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the usual city noises outside seemed muted, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Sarah continued, her voice breaking slightly with emotion. "You know what I did today, sir? I held an elderly man's hand as we restarted his heart. I cleaned and bandaged a child's wounds after a car accident. I comforted a teenage girl who thought she was dying but was having a panic attack. I didn't ask about their race, their religion, their political beliefs. I just helped them because that's what humans do for other humans." Lucy wiped tears from her eyes, her phone still recording. Kate had moved to stand near her friend, both of them watching Sarah with a mixture of sadness and admiration. Harold was still on the phone, but he was watching Sarah too. "Angela, you need to hear this," he said, turning his phone towards Sarah. The driver had sat back down heavily in his seat, his earlier bravado deflating with each word Sarah spoke. Outside, the police siren was getting closer. "I've spent my whole life dealing with moments like this," Sarah continued, her voice steady despite the tears now rolling down her cheeks. "Little moments, big moments, all of them painful, all of them unnecessary. And you know what the saddest part is? I am not even angry anymore. I am just tired. Bone deep tired of having to prove my humanity to people who've decided I am less than them without even knowing my name." The bus was completely silent now, except for the soft sounds of sniffling from Lucy and Kate. Even the driver seemed unable to speak, his face a mixture of emotions Sarah had seen before: shame, confusion, defensiveness. "So here we are," Sarah said, wiping her eyes with her free hand while keeping the phone steady. "You can either do the right thing and drive this bus to my stop, or we can wait for the police and your supervisors to arrive. But either way, I want you to know something." She paused, gathering her strength. "I forgive you." The driver's head snapped up, his eyes wide with surprise. "Not because you deserve it," Sarah continued, "but because I refuse to let your hatred become my burden. I refuse to let this moment make me bitter. I refuse to let you change who I am. A nurse, a mother, a human being worthy of basic respect." Blue and red lights suddenly illuminated the interior of the bus as a police car pulled up behind them. Sarah's heart raced, but she kept her phone steady, kept her voice clear. "So, what's it going to be, sir? How does this story end?" The driver opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, another vehicle pulled up, a transit authority supervisor's car, its emergency lights flashing. The next few minutes would change everything, but in this moment, Sarah Johnson sat straight-backed in her bus seat, phone recording, heart pounding, channeling the strength of generations of strong black women who had faced down hatred with dignity and grace. The door to the bus opened with a hydraulic hiss, and footsteps could be heard coming up the stairs. Sarah took a deep breath, ready for whatever came next. Through the bus windows, Sarah could see two police officers approaching, one black, one white. Behind them, a woman in a transit authority uniform was walking briskly, her face set in a concerned expression. "Ma'am," the driver called out, suddenly finding his voice again. "She's the one causing trouble. She's refusing to." "I suggest," Harold interrupted firmly, "that you stop talking right now. Angela, come listen to what this young lady has to say." The transit supervisor, Angela Chen, according to her nameplate, boarded the bus first, followed by the officers. Sarah kept her phone recording, her nurse's training helping her maintain steady hands despite her racing heart. "I am Supervisor Chen," the woman announced, her eyes taking in the scene. "Can someone explain what's happening here?" Before the driver could speak, Lucy stepped forward, her own phone still streaming. "He tried to force her off the bus for no reason. We all saw it." "She's done nothing wrong. She's a nurse trying to get home." Officer Jackson, the black officer, turned to Sarah. "Ma'am, are you all right?" "Yes, officer." Sarah replied calmly, though her voice trembled slightly. "I am just trying to get to my stop on Cedar Avenue. I'd be happy to show you my hospital ID and bus pass." The white officer, whose nameplate read Martinez, was speaking quietly to the driver, who had begun to look increasingly uncomfortable. "Frank," Supervisor Chen said sharply to the driver, "is there a reason you pulled over 6 stops before this passenger's destination?" The driver shifted in his seat, his earlier bravado completely gone. "She was, I thought. There was a situation." "What situation?" Chen pressed. "Because from what dispatch told me, and from what I am seeing on multiple recordings right now, you stopped this bus to remove a paying passenger for no valid reason." Sarah lowered her phone slightly, feeling the weight of the moment. "All I want," she said softly, "is to get home to my children. That's all I've wanted this entire time." Kate, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "We've been recording everything. He specifically said he didn't want her kind on his bus. It's all on video." Officer Martinez's expression hardened at those words. "Sir, are you aware that discriminating against passengers based on race is a civil rights violation?" The driver's face went through a series of emotions: anger, fear, defeat. "I didn't. That's not what I—" "It's exactly what you meant," Sarah said, her voice carrying a lifetime of similar experiences. "But you know what? This isn't just about me anymore. It's about every person who's ever had to face this kind of treatment. It's about making sure my children don't have to go through this same fight." Supervisor Chen was typing rapidly on her tablet. "Frank Miller, you are suspended effective immediately. Please gather your things and exit the bus. We'll have a replacement driver here in 5 minutes." "You can't do that," the driver protested. "I've been driving this route for 8 years. And tonight you violated multiple transit authority policies, not to mention civil rights laws," Chen replied firmly. "Be grateful if suspension is all you face after we review these recordings." Harold, who had been watching everything unfold, nodded in satisfaction. "Angela, make sure the board sees all of this. Every second." The replacement driver arrived quickly, a middle-aged woman who introduced herself as Patricia. As Frank Miller was escorted off the bus by Officer Martinez, Sarah finally lowered her phone, her hands shaking slightly as the adrenaline began to wear off. Lucy and Kate moved to sit closer to her. "You were amazing," Lucy whispered, her eyes still wet with tears. "The way you handled that, I've never seen anything like it." Officer Jackson approached Sarah carefully. "Ma'am, would you like to file a formal complaint? We can take your statement right now." Sarah looked around the bus, at Harold with his proud, sad smile, at Lucy and Kate with their youthful outrage and solidarity, at Supervisor Chen, who was already organizing an investigation. She thought about all the people who would see these recordings, about the conversations they might spark. "Yes," she said finally, her voice tired but determined. "I would, because silence won't change anything." As she began giving her statement, her phone buzzed with a text from her son Marcus. "Mom, are you okay? You should have been home by now." Sarah typed back quickly. "I am okay, baby. Just dealing with something important. Making sure things change, little by little." The city lights flickered outside the bus windows, and Sarah could feel the weight of the night's events settling over her. But something else was building too, a sense that maybe, just maybe, this painful moment could lead to something meaningful. Sarah took a deep breath, steadying herself for what she knew would be another pivotal moment. The bus remained parked, its interior now crowded with officers taking statements and Supervisor Chen documenting everything. But something inside Sarah told her this wasn't over yet. There was more to be said, more to be done. "Before we continue," she said, her voice carrying through the bus, "I'd like to say something to everyone here." Officer Jackson paused in his note-taking, looking up with interest. Lucy and Kate lowered their phones but kept recording. Harold leaned forward in his seat, his weathered face attentive. "Miss Johnson," Supervisor Chen started, "we can handle the rest of—" "Please," Sarah interrupted gently, "this needs to be said." She stood up slowly, her nurse's uniform wrinkled from the long shift but her posture straight and dignified. The overhead lights cast shadows across her face, highlighting the tears that still glistened in her eyes. "My grandmother used to tell me stories," she began, her voice soft but clear. "Stories about drinking from colored-only fountains. About walking miles to school because she couldn't ride the bus. About keeping her eyes down and her voice quiet because doing anything else was dangerous." Lucy let out a small sob, quickly muffled by her hand. Her friend Kate squeezed her shoulder. "When I was a little girl," Sarah continued, "I promised myself I'd never be quiet in the face of injustice. But you know what? Sometimes I was. Sometimes it was just easier to let it slide. To pretend I didn't see the looks, didn't hear the whispers, didn't feel the sting of being treated as less than human." Harold nodded slowly, his hands tight around his cane. "We all did, child. We all did." But tonight, Sarah's voice grew stronger. Tonight something changed. Not just for me, but for everyone on this bus. We all had a choice to make, and look what happened. She turned to Lucy and Kate. You two beautiful souls didn't hesitate to stand up for what's right. You didn't think about the consequences. You just knew something wrong was happening and you refused to be silent. The young women wiped their eyes, their phones still recording every word. Sarah looked at Harold. Sir, you spoke up with the wisdom and authority of your years, reminding us that there are still people in positions of power who remember their own struggles and want to make things better. Harold cleared his throat, emotion making his voice rough. Least I could do, Miss Johnson, least I could do. Turning to the officers, Sarah continued. And you both responded not just with professionalism, but with humanity. You listened. You understood. You showed that the system can work when people choose to do what's right. Officer Jackson shifted his weight, clearly moved. Officer Martinez nodded solemnly. Even you, Miss Chen, Sarah said to the supervisor. You didn't try to sweep this under the rug. You didn't make excuses. You took immediate action. Supervisor Chen straightened her jacket. We're trying to be better, Miss Johnson. We have to be better. Sarah's voice cracked slightly as she continued. But you know who I really want to talk to? That driver, because in his eyes, I saw something I've seen too many times before, fear. Fear of what's different, fear of change, fear of facing his own prejudices. The bus was completely silent now, every person hanging on her word. I've spent my entire nursing career dealing with people's fears. Sometimes it's fear of pain, fear of death, fear of the unknown. But too often, it's fear of someone who looks different, speaks different, comes from somewhere different. She paused, wiping a tear from her cheek. And you know what I've learned? Fear doesn't go away by feeding it more fear. It doesn't disappear through anger or hatred. It only changes when we face it with truth, with dignity, and yes, sometimes with forgiveness. Lucy stood up suddenly. But he doesn't deserve forgiveness. What he did was horrible. Sarah smiled gently. Forgiveness isn't about what people deserve, honey. It's about refusing to let their actions poison your own heart. It's about being strong enough to break the cycle of hatred. Officer Jackson cleared his throat. Ma'am, that's powerful. But we still need to process this incident according to protocol. Of course, Sarah nodded. And I'll cooperate fully, but I want everyone here, everyone who will see these videos, to understand something. This moment isn't just about one bus driver's actions or one woman's response. It's about all of us. Every single person who encounters injustice has a choice. Stay silent or speak up. Look away or stand firm. Let fear win or choose love. Supervisor Chen was typing rapidly on her tablet, but her eyes were glistening. Miss Johnson, would you be willing to speak at our next driver training session? Your perspective could make a real difference. Before Sarah could respond, Harold spoke up. Angela, this needs to go further than just driver training. The whole transit authority needs to hear this. The whole city needs to hear this. Kate, who had been relatively quiet, suddenly found her voice. It already is. Our live streams have thousands of viewers right now. People are sharing it everywhere. Sarah felt a wave of emotion wash over her. This wasn't what she'd wanted when she got on the bus tonight. She just wanted to get home, take off her shoes, maybe heat up some leftovers. But sometimes, she realized, the most important moments come when we least expect them. What happens next? She said, looking around at every face on the bus. Depends on all of us. These videos will go viral. People will be outraged for a day or two. And then what? Will anything really change? The question hung in the air, heavy with possibility and responsibility. I am willing to speak, she continued. I am willing to share my story. But real change doesn't come from one person speaking up once. It comes from all of us, every day, choosing to be better, choosing to stand up, choosing to see each other's humanity. Lucy wiped her eyes. I'll never be silent again. Never. Me neither, Kate affirmed. Harold struggled to his feet, leaning on his cane. In all my years with the Transit Authority, I've never heard anyone speak truth with such grace. Miss Johnson, you've taught us all something tonight. Officer Martinez, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. Ma'am, we're about ready to wrap up the official statement. But I want you to know, this is why I became a police officer. To be present for moments like this, to help make sure justice is served. Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of the night in every bone of her body. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Marcus. "Mom, people are sharing videos of you online. You are trending. Are you okay? Do you need me to come get you?" She smiled tiredly at her phone, typing back, "I am okay, baby. Just doing what we've always talked about, being the change we want to see." Supervisor Chen approached with some final forms. "Miss Johnson, once you sign these, our replacement driver will take everyone to their stops. But please know, this isn't over. We're going to make sure your experience leads to real institutional change." As Sarah sat down to sign the papers, she felt something she hadn't expected: hope. Not the fragile hope of wishful thinking, but the solid hope that comes from seeing people choose to do what's right, even when it's hard. The night had started with hatred and fear, but it was ending with something else entirely: a reminder that change is possible, that dignity can triumph over discrimination, that love can indeed be stronger than fear. As Sarah finished signing the last form, Supervisor Chen's phone started ringing incessantly. She glanced at the screen, her eyes widening. The videos, they're everywhere. Local news stations are calling. They want to interview you, Miss Johnson. Sarah shook her head slowly. Tonight's not about interviews. It's about something much more important. Lucy, who had been checking her phone, gasped. "Oh my God, my video has over 50,000 views already. People are sharing it like crazy. They're calling you the angel in scrubs." "Read some of the comments," Kate urged, scrolling through her own phone. "People are saying how you changed their perspective, how they've been through similar things but never had the courage to speak up." Officer Jackson stepped forward. "Miss Johnson, given how viral this is becoming, we should discuss security measures. Some people might not take kindly to this kind of exposure." Sarah smiled tiredly. "Officer, I've been dealing with that kind of threat my entire life. But you know what? Fear can't live in the light. That's what tonight proved." Harold, who had been on his own phone, looked up with tears in his eyes. "My granddaughter just texted me. She saw the video. Said she's proud her grandpa stood up for what's right. Said you reminded her of Rosa Parks." Sarah felt her heart clench at the comparison. "No, sir. I am just a tired nurse who decided enough was enough." Supervisor Chen finished organizing her papers. "The replacement driver is ready. We can get everyone home now. Miss Johnson, is there anything else you need from us?" Sarah stood up, smoothing her wrinkled uniform. "Just one thing. I want to make sure that driver, Mr. Miller, gets more than just punishment. He needs education. He needs to understand why his actions hurt not just me, but everyone who witnesses or experiences discrimination." "I'll make sure of it personally," Chen promised. "And, Miss Johnson, thank you for showing us all how to handle hatred with grace." The replacement driver, Patricia, started the engine. The familiar rumble of the bus felt different now. Like everything else about this night, it carried new meaning. As they finally pulled away from the curb, Sarah looked around at the faces that had become part of her story: Lucy and Kate, still recording but now with purpose rather than outrage. Harold, dignified and proud in his veteran's cap. The officers who had chosen justice over bureaucracy. Her phone buzzed one more time. A text from her daughter Jasmine. "Mom, I am crying watching these videos. You did what I've always wanted to do but was too scared. You showed them what strength really looks like." Sarah touched the screen gently, her vision blurring with tears. "Just following the path you and your brother helped me find, baby," she typed back. "Sometimes the hardest moments show us who we really are." The bus rolled through the nighttime streets, carrying its passengers toward their destination. But everyone on board knew they had already arrived somewhere more important: a moment of transformation, a point of no return. The bus was finally moving again, but something profound had shifted in the atmosphere. Sarah stood up from her seat, legs shaky from exhaustion and emotion, and made her way to the front of the vehicle. Patricia, the replacement driver, gave her an encouraging nod as she passed. Looking out at the handful of passengers who had become unexpected witnesses to history, Sarah felt a sudden urge to speak, not for the cameras this time, but from her heart. "Before we all go our separate ways tonight," she began, her voice carrying the weight of decades of similar moments, "I want to say something to each of you." Lucy quickly wiped her eyes, her pink hair slightly mussed from the emotional evening. Kate sat beside her, phone still recording but lowered to capture the moment more naturally. "When I got on this bus tonight," Sarah continued, gripping the handrail for support, "I was just a tired nurse wanting to get home, but sometimes life has other plans. Sometimes we're called to stand up in ways we never expected." Harold shifted in his seat, his veteran's cap slightly askew. "You did more than stand up, young lady. You showed us all what dignity looks like." Sarah smiled gently. "That's just it, though. This moment wasn't just about me. It was about all of us. Each person on this bus had a choice to make tonight, and look what you all chose." She turned to Lucy and Kate. "You young ladies didn't hesitate. You didn't think about consequences or worry about getting involved. You saw injustice, and you refused to be silent." "We just did what was right," Lucy whispered, her voice trembling. "What anyone should do." "But that's exactly my point," Sarah responded. "Not everyone does do what's right. Not everyone speaks up. You two represent hope for the future, a generation that won't stand by and watch hatred win." Kate reached for Lucy's hand, squeezing it tight. "We learned something tonight that no classroom could ever teach us." Sarah nodded, then turned to Harold. "And you, sir, you used your experience, your authority, not to protect the system, but to challenge it when it was wrong. Do you know how rare that is?" Harold gripped his cane tighter, emotion evident in his weathered face. 40 years I worked for transit authority, saw too many incidents swept under the rug. Not this time, not on my watch. The thing is," Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger, "change doesn't happen in grand gestures. It happens in moments like this, when ordinary people choose to do extraordinary things." Patricia spoke up from the driver's seat, keeping her eyes on the road. "Miss Johnson, if you don't mind me saying, what you did tonight, it's going to change things. We drivers, we're going to be talking about this for a long time." Sarah moved closer to the front, steadying herself as the bus turned a corner. "I hope so, but not just about what happened. I hope they talk about what could have happened instead, about the choice that driver could have made." Her phone buzzed again. Another news outlet requesting an interview. She ignored it. "You know what I am going to remember most about tonight?" she asked, looking around at the faces that had become so familiar in such a short time. "Not the hatred, not the fear. I am going to remember how strangers became allies, how a moment of ugliness turned into something beautiful." Lucy stood up suddenly, her voice passionate. "Miss Johnson, people need to hear this. Not just the confrontation, but this part too. This is what real change looks like." Sarah felt tears welling up again, but these were different from the earlier ones. "Maybe you are right. Maybe that's why all of this happened. Not just to expose one incident of discrimination, but to show people here is another way." Harold cleared his throat. "Angela, Supervisor Chen, she's already working on making this a teaching moment for the whole transit system, but it needs to go further." "It," Sarah said softly, "because each of you will carry this night with you. You'll tell others. You'll speak up the next time you see injustice. You'll remember that change is possible." The bus was approaching Cedar Avenue now, Sarah's original destination. After everything that had happened, it seemed almost surreal that she would still end up exactly where she'd planned. Patricia turned slightly in her seat. "Miss Johnson, your stop is coming up, but somehow it doesn't feel right just letting you walk off alone after everything." "I'll walk with her," Lucy offered immediately, standing up. Kate nodded, gathering her thing. Harold struggled to his feet. "My stop's the next one anyway. I'll make sure she gets home safe too." Sarah felt overwhelmed by their kindness. "You don't have to." "Yes, we do," Kate interrupted firmly. "Because that's what tonight taught us. We have to take care of each other." As the bus pulled up to her stop, Sarah looked around one final time at the space that had become so much more than just a bus. In less than an hour, it had transformed into a classroom, a courtroom, and finally, a place of healing. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice thick with emotion. "All of you, for showing me that I was right to keep believing in humanity." The doors opened with a familiar hiss, but before Sarah could step down, Patricia called out, "Miss Johnson, would you be willing to come speak to my church group? People need to hear your message." Sarah paused on the steps, a small smile playing at her lips. You know what? Yes. Because this story isn't over, it's just beginning. As she stepped onto the sidewalk, followed by Lucy, Kate, and Harold, Sarah could hear her phone buzzing again. More messages, more requests for interviews, more people wanting to hear her story. But right now, all she wanted was to get home to her children, to hold them close and tell them that yes, the world could be hard and cruel, but it could also be beautiful and surprising. That for every person who tried to push you down, there would be others who would help you stand tall. The small group walked in comfortable silence, their footsteps echoing in the quiet night. When they reached Sarah's modest house, the porch light was on, and she could see Marcus and Jasmine's anxious faces through the window. Mom! They both burst out the door, enveloping her in a tight hug. We saw the videos, Marcus said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. You were amazing. Jasmine wiped tears from her eyes. You showed them, Mom. You showed them all. Sarah held her children close, then turned to her unexpected escorts. Would you all like to come in? I think we could all use some tea after tonight. And as they settled into her small living room, the tired nurse, the veteran, the college student, and her children, Sarah realized that sometimes the most powerful response to hatred isn't more hatred. Sometimes it's opening your heart, your home, and showing that love can indeed change the world, one bus ride at a time. The night that had started with discrimination had ended with connection. The story that began with pain had transformed into one of hope. And Sarah Johnson, who had just wanted to get home from her shift, had become something she never expected, a symbol of the change that happens when ordinary people choose to stand up for what's right. As they sat in Sarah's modest living room, the weight of the evening's events began to settle around them. Marcus brought out a tray of steaming teacups while Jasmine grabbed extra chairs from the dining room. Mom, you are trending nationwide, Jasmine said, showing her phone screen. People are sharing your videos with hashtags like #BeTheChange and #NursesSpeakUp. Sarah shook her head, still trying to process everything. That wasn't my intention. You just stood up for what's right, Harold interrupted gently, accepting a cup of tea with shaking hands. And sometimes that's all it takes to start a movement. Lucy and Kate sat close together on the couch, their phones finally lowered, taking in the family photos that covered the walls. Sarah in her graduation gown, her children at various ages. An older woman who had her same determined eyes. Is that your grandmother? Lucy asked, pointing to one of the photos. Sarah nodded, her eyes misting over. Yes, the one I told you about on the bus. She would have been proud of tonight, not just of me, but of all of you. Miss Johnson, Kate said hesitantly, I know you probably want to rest, but would you mind if I shared something my professor said about moments like these? I am studying social justice at the university. Of course, honey. He said that change doesn't come from the big gestures that make history books. It comes from small moments of courage that inspire others to be brave too. Marcus, who had been quiet until now, spoke up, like when Mom taught me to stand up to bullies in school, not with fists but with words and dignity. Exactly. Sarah smiled, reaching out to squeeze her son's hand. And look at you now, heading to law school next fall. Harold set down his teacup with a slight clatter. You know, in all my years with the Transit Authority, I saw so many incidents swept under the rug. People too afraid to speak up, too tired to fight. But tonight was different. Because of Mom, Jasmine said proudly. No, Sarah corrected gently. Because we all chose to act. Every person on that bus made a choice that changed the outcome. A notification sound came from multiple phones simultaneously. Lucy gasped as she checked her screen. The Transit Authority just released a statement. They're implementing immediate changes to their training programs and anti-discrimination policies. They're calling it the Sarah Johnson Initiative. Sarah felt overwhelmed. That's too much. I am just one person who showed us all how to face hatred with grace. Harold finished. Don't diminish what happened tonight, Miss Johnson. Sometimes one person's courage is exactly what the world needs to remember its humanity. As the night wore on, more tea was poured, stories were shared, and bonds were formed that would last far beyond this evening. Lucy and Kate talked about starting a social justice club at their university. Harold shared stories of his own battles for equality during his career. Jasmine and Marcus spoke about how their mother's strength had shaped their own paths in life. And Sarah? She sat in her favorite armchair, finally able to take off her nursing shoes, surrounded by this unlikely family brought together by what could have been just another incident of discrimination. Her phone had stopped buzzing with notifications. She'd turned it off. Tomorrow, there would be interviews to consider, statements to make, changes to help implement. But tonight was for this, for healing, for connection, for showing her children and these young students that love could indeed be stronger than hate. As the first hints of dawn began to color the sky, Sarah looked around her living room at these faces that had become part of her story. Each of them had been changed by tonight's events, each carrying a piece of this moment forward into their own lives. And maybe that, she realized, was the real victory. Not just standing up to one act of discrimination, but inspiring others to carry the torch of change forward in their own way. The night that had started with hatred had ended with hope. The journey that began with pain had transformed into a pathway toward progress. And Sarah Johnson, who had just wanted to get home from her nursing shift, had become something she never expected. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful response to darkness is to shine your light even brighter.